In the heart of West Africa, under the blazing sun that has watched over empires rise and fall, a quiet revolution is unfolding. Not one of bullets or slogans, but of steel, energy, and vision. Burkina Faso, once dismissed as a forgotten land in the world's industrial hierarchy, is now on the verge of something no one thought possible. An industrial revolution led not by the West, but by China. The story begins in Ouagadougou, where cranes pierce the sky and the earth trembles beneath the weight of new foundations. Massive roads are being paved, railways laid down, and power grids stretched across the horizon. What was once desert and dust is slowly transforming into the spark of a new era, one that may redefine Africa's role in the global economy forever. When Traoré took office, few outside Burkina Faso believed he could truly challenge the grip of the West. But then came a whisper, an agreement being forged far from Washington and Paris, deep in Beijing's corridors of power. For the first time, China wasn't coming as a lender with harsh conditions. This time it came as a partner, ready to invest in Africa's independence, not its dependence. This was not charity, it was strategy. China saw in Burkina Faso what others ignored: untapped potential, rare minerals, and a leader with the courage to say no to foreign manipulation. In private talks, Chinese engineers and Burkinabe officials began mapping out what would later be called the Golden Belt Initiative, a multi-billion-dollar project designed to connect Burkina Faso's industries to the rest of Africa and beyond. Factories are being built to process local materials. Solar power plants are rising to fuel the future of African production. Thousands of jobs are being created for young Burkinabe workers who, for decades, were told their only future lay in migration. And Traoré, he's made one thing clear: we will no longer export our wealth for others to refine. We will refine it here. We will build it here. We will own it here. That declaration, captured in one of his fiery national speeches, sent ripples through Western boardrooms. The message was unmistakable. Burkina Faso was no longer for sale. But what shocked everyone most wasn't the project itself. It was who was financing it. Beijing approved a $6.5 billion infrastructure package, an amount larger than Burkina Faso's annual GDP. This wasn't just about roads or factories. It was about transforming the nation's entire economic architecture. The deal included a high-speed trade corridor linking Ouagadougou to Ghana's port cities, a new industrial park with over 100 manufacturing units, a mineral refinery center aimed at processing gold and bauxite, and a brand new university for engineering and technology, built in collaboration with Chinese institutions. Western analysts called it a debt trap, but Traoré laughed. He said, "Debt becomes a trap only when it's used for consumption. When it's used to build, it becomes freedom." His words resonated across Africa. Leaders from Mali, Niger, and Chad began sending delegations to observe what was unfolding in Burkina Faso. For years, they had been told that economic independence was a fantasy, that their only path was through IMF loans and Western aid. But now, they were watching a young African leader rewrite the rulebook. China, too, saw this moment as history in motion. Its representatives publicly praised Burkina Faso's boldness and vision, calling it a model of South-South cooperation. But privately, they knew this was about more than development. It was about shifting global influence, from the Atlantic to the heart of Africa. As new industrial complexes began rising from the ground, the old colonial powers grew restless. Reports began circulating in Western media portraying Burkina Faso as Beijing's new satellite. Think tanks started releasing papers warning of China's silent colonization. But Traoré's response was sharp. "We have been colonized before. We know what it looks like. This is not colonization. This is collaboration." Inside the presidential palace, his team worked day and night to ensure every clause of the deal benefited the Burkinabe people. Unlike past contracts, these agreements required joint ownership, technology transfer, and training programs for local engineers. China would not just build, it would teach. In one symbolic gesture, Traoré inaugurated the first fully Burkina-Faso-operated solar manufacturing line in West Africa. Cameras captured him pressing the start button as the crowd erupted in cheers. He turned to the journalists and said, "This is not just energy. This is dignity." That moment went viral. Across social media, Africans shared the video under the hashtag #AfricaBuildsBack. Within hours, it had millions of views. But the road ahead was not without obstacles. Western corporations began withdrawing investments. Aid programs were reevaluated. The World Bank issued warnings about unsustainable projects. But the Burkina government stood firm. For the first time, they didn't panic, because for the first time, they had a choice. The partnership with China wasn't just financial, it was philosophical. It aligned with Traoré's belief that Africa must stand on its own feet, not bow to any global power. He called it the new industrial spirit, where production, not politics, would define prosperity. By the end of that first year, Burkina Faso's GDP growth had doubled. Exports rose. Power outages decreased. The youth employment rate hit record highs, and the world began to take notice. From Washington to Paris, questions began to echo. How did Burkina Faso do this? But Traoré didn't answer. He didn't need to. The results spoke louder than any press conference ever could. The new revolution had already begun. As bulldozers roared and factories rose across Burkina Faso, whispers began to stir in the polished halls of Washington, Paris, and Brussels. The Western world had long seen this small landlocked nation as a quiet, manageable pawn in the African chessboard. But now, under Traoré's command and China's backing, that pawn had just evolved into a queen. The U.S. State Department's briefings became increasingly tense. Satellite images of massive construction sites, Chinese cargo planes landing weekly, and convoys of industrial materials heading north. All of it painted a picture that Washington could no longer ignore. Burkina Faso wasn't just modernizing, it was defecting from Western control. Within weeks, Western think tanks flooded the media with reports labeling China's presence in Africa as neo-colonial manipulation. Headlines screamed, "China buys Africa's future for $12 billion, and Beijing tightens grip on West Africa." But Traoré didn't waver. He appeared on national television, wearing his signature beret and speaking with the intensity that had become his trademark. "They say we are being controlled. Tell me, were we not controlled when we begged for loans that destroyed our children's futures? This time, we build for ourselves. If that scares them, it means we are finally doing something right." The crowd erupted in applause. In Ouagadougou's central square, thousands gathered to hear his words broadcast live. Farmers, students, and workers chanted in unison, "Africa builds back." The movement had become unstoppable. But behind the scenes, pressure was mounting. Western aid programs began to freeze funding. International organizations hinted at sanctions. Even the IMF issued subtle warnings that Burkina Faso's financial direction may lead to instability. Traoré's response, he called their bluff. "Instability," he said in a speech to African youth. "The only thing unstable is their control. We are stable in our conviction, in our labor, in our unity." Meanwhile, Chinese engineers were everywhere, collaborating, not commanding. They trained local teams in advanced manufacturing, shared renewable energy technology, and helped set up what would soon become Africa's first gold-backed trade exchange. It was a direct challenge to the US dollar's supremacy on the continent. And that's when the game changed. Internal memos leaked from European embassies in West Africa revealed a growing fear. If Burkina Faso succeeds, others will follow. They were right. Niger sent its first industrial delegation to Ouagadougou. Mali signed a bilateral cooperation pact within weeks. Chad and Guinea expressed interest in joining what was now being quietly referred to as the Burkina industrial model. Burkina Faso, once dismissed as the poorest of the poor, had become a symbol of proof that Africa didn't need permission to rise. But with success came sabotage. In early reports from local media, Trucks carrying machinery for the new copper refinery mysteriously caught fire on the highway. Investigations pointed to technical failures, but insiders whispered about foreign interference. Online, disinformation campaigns began circulating, fake videos claiming Chinese soldiers had occupied Burkina Faso land or that workers were being exploited. It was psychological warfare, designed to sow division between the people and their leadership. Traoré called an emergency cabinet meeting. Advisors suggested calming relations with the West, perhaps softening the China narrative. But the president refused. He leaned forward and said calmly, "When a tree grows too strong, the old forest tries to choke it. Let them try. We will grow higher." His defiance resonated deeply with the youth. University students started forming industrial study circles. Farmers began organizing cooperatives to supply new factories. Even the country's artists joined in, creating murals with slogans like "We build, we rise, we own." Meanwhile, in Beijing, the partnership deepened. Chinese officials praised Burkina Faso as a model partner in Africa's industrial future. President Xi reportedly called Traoré personally, congratulating him on courageous leadership that inspires a continent. But in Western capitals, the reaction was far from admiration. Analysts warned of a domino effect that could shift the entire geopolitical map of Africa. One American columnist wrote, "If Burkina Faso becomes a hub for Chinese industry, Africa's balance of power will never return to the West." And indeed, that balance was already tilting. By late 2025, Burkina Faso's export rates had tripled. Solar manufacturing, steel production, and mineral refining plants were operational. The new railway linking Ouagadougou to Ghana's ports slashed export costs by 40%. The numbers were undeniable, the results unstoppable. But perhaps the most powerful change was psychological. For the first time in decades, the Burkina Faso people began to believe that greatness wasn't a dream, it was a plan. Still, Traoré knew that industrial progress meant nothing without defense. His next move would shock the entire world. As dawn broke over Ouagadougou, the capital buzzed with a rare energy, an unspoken realization that Burkina Faso was no longer the same nation it had been just a few years ago. Concrete towers replaced old government offices, roads shimmered with fresh asphalt, and industrial districts echoed with the sound of machines, Burkina Faso machines. But President Ibrahim Traoré wasn't celebrating. Behind the walls of the presidential compound, his focus had shifted. The economy was rising, yes, but every rise attracts enemies. Intelligence reports arrived on his desk, encrypted messages from local agents and allied African networks. Suspicious drones had been spotted along the borders. Foreign NGOs, once neutral, were quietly collecting data near the construction zones. Western consultants, some operating under the guise of technical advisors, had begun probing into China's contracts. The war for Africa's independence had moved from battlefields to boardrooms, from guns to economic sabotage. Traoré leaned forward in the War Council and said, "They tried sanctions, they failed. They tried propaganda, they failed. Now they will try infiltration, but this time we are ready." The ministers nodded. Burkina Faso's intelligence alliance with Russia and Mali, codenamed Project Koba, was already active. Russian cyber experts trained local teams to secure communication channels, while Mali provided ground coordination for border surveillance. And then came the masterstroke. Traoré proposed a new initiative, the Pan-African Industrial Defense Pact, a partnership where African nations would not only trade together but protect their industries together. "An African hand must guard African steel," he declared. "If we build factories, we must also build shields." Within a month, Niger, Guinea, and Chad joined. Each pledged a portion of their defense budget to form a joint protection force for industrial and energy zones. China quietly supplied drones and AI-powered radar systems, not for war, but for deterrence. In Washington, a classified report leaked to Politico revealed growing panic. Burkina Faso's military-industrial alignment, poses a direct challenge to U.S. strategic interests in sub-Saharan Africa. The Pentagon held closed-door meetings. The European Union called for dialogue. The IMF suddenly offered new incentives, low-interest loans disguised as olive branches. But Traoré rejected them all. "We've read this script before," he told his council. "They lend us chains and call it charity." Meanwhile, in the industrial zones, transformation reached an awe-inspiring level. Burkina Faso launched its first AI-assisted solar factory, a partnership between Chinese engineers and local graduates. Robots welded frames while Burkinabe technicians monitored performance metrics, all coded in French, Malay, and Mandarin. One factory engineer said proudly to a local reporter, "Before, our youth dreamed of leaving for Europe. Now, they dream of building Africa." The statement went viral across the continent. Traoré shared it himself with a single caption: "This is what freedom sounds like." But as momentum built, so did Western retaliation. News outlets began publishing investigations alleging corruption in Chinese contracts. Social media accounts with fake Burkinabe names spread disinformation, claiming Chinese companies were stealing gold and controlling the government. To counter the storm, Traoré launched a campaign called Facts for Africa, a digital platform broadcasting transparent project data, showing live progress from each site. Viewers across Africa watched live drone footage of their future being built brick by brick. The Western media blackout couldn't stop it. The truth had gone viral. Soon, other nations wanted in. Kenya sent delegates to study Burkina Faso's renewable energy model. Congo expressed interest in the new gold-backed currency linked to industrial exports. Even Tanzania's president made a statement praising Traoré's courage. When one lion roars, the forest listens. But as the movement expanded, whispers of covert plans emerged from Washington. Intelligence insiders mentioned Operation Mirage, a covert attempt to destabilize Burkina Faso's alliance with China by targeting internal divisions. Cyberattacks began hitting key data servers. Anonymous messages flooded the networks with fake leaks, suggesting China was plotting to seize Burkina Faso's resources. This time, however, Traoré was one step ahead. He had already decentralized the country's data systems, distributing critical information across secure African networks in Ghana, South Africa, and Russia. He smiled during a cabinet briefing, saying, "They're fighting a ghost. We no longer store our future in one room, it's stored in the hearts of millions." Outside, rallies erupted in support. Youth carried banners saying, "Industrial power is our weapon." Musicians released rap tracks praising the revolution. Across the continent, Traoré's face became a symbol not of rebellion but of renaissance. China, seeing the impact, doubled its support. In a groundbreaking deal, it announced a $3 billion Sino-African tech fund, prioritizing Burkina Faso as the pilot country. This wasn't just investment, it was partnership. Factories began integrating advanced robotics, AI, and blockchain to track gold and mineral trades, ensuring no Western manipulation could distort the data again. Africa was learning not just to build, but to build smart. One evening, as the sun set over the gleaming new solar farms, Traoré stood on a balcony overlooking the skyline. He whispered to his aide, "They said we were too small to rise, but they forgot, even a spark can light a continent." Little did he know, that spark was already spreading. The final phase of Burkina Faso's transformation had begun. From the bustling streets of Ouagadougou to the mining towns in the north, a new rhythm pulsed through the nation. The sound of engines, construction cranes, and factories roaring with purpose. What once was one of the poorest nations in the world was now on track to become one of Africa's industrial powerhouses. But the rise of Burkina Faso under Traoré's leadership didn't come without enemies. In the shadows, powerful figures from the West watched uneasily as a new alliance of sovereignty and production began to take shape. Washington, London, and Paris all realized the same thing. They were losing control of Africa's economic heartbeat. Inside a private meeting at the Pentagon, a frustrated analyst slammed his report on the table. This isn't just about China anymore. Traore has created something bigger, a movement. If other African nations follow his model, our influence in the region is gone. Across the ocean in Ouagadougou, Traore was completely aware of the storm gathering outside Africa's borders. Yet he remained calm, almost defiant. During a meeting with his ministers, he said, "They are panicking because, for the first time, we are dreaming without asking permission." The room erupted in quiet agreement. China's involvement in Burkina Faso's industrial revolution had reached unprecedented levels. But contrary to Western propaganda, this was not colonialism in disguise. It was a partnership forged in transparency and shared growth. The new industrial zones were 60% Burkinabe owned. The profits were reinvested into education, health, and defense. Traore personally inaugurated the first African-Chinese Industrial Academy, where thousands of Burkinabe youth were being trained in robotics, metallurgy, and energy systems. Cameras broadcasted the ceremony live. As he walked through the training halls, the young engineers saluted him, not as a politician, but as a mentor. He raised his hand and spoke, his voice echoing through the hall. "We are not borrowing progress. We are building it with our own hands. Let them call us whatever they wish. The results will speak louder than their lies." But while Burkina Faso's factories thrived, Western disinformation campaigns escalated. Global media ran stories claiming China was building military bases in Africa or using African gold to back its own currency. Anonymous accounts posted deepfakes showing supposed leaked deals between Ouagadougou and Beijing. Still, none of it slowed the momentum. Burkina Faso's transparency portal, launched by the government, exposed every single financial transaction between China and Burkina Faso in real time. Contracts, loan rates, and equity shares were all publicly viewable. This digital revolution dismantled decades of manipulation that had kept African economies opaque and exploitable. And soon, Africa started to take notice. From Dakar to Dar es Salaam, leaders began requesting meetings with Traore. Delegations from Nigeria, Cameroon, and Ghana traveled to Ouagadougou to study its sovereign industrial model. In one landmark summit, hosted under the blazing Sahel sun, Traore addressed over a dozen African heads of state and business leaders. Cameras captured every word as he declared, "For too long, we were told that Africa must export its raw wealth to survive. But tell me, why must the hands that dig gold not also shape steel? Why must we give away our future in barrels and bars while our children starve? Those days are over. Burkina Faso is living proof." The applause was thunderous. Even seasoned diplomats stood to their feet. But the speech also triggered alarms across Western capitals. The World Bank quickly revised its Africa outlook, predicting economic instability if unsupervised national industrialization continued. Meanwhile, Western think tanks began publishing editorials labeling Traore's policy as authoritarian protectionism. The message was clear. They feared what he represented. In Moscow and Beijing, however, the tone was different. A joint communiqué between Russia and China announced a strategic development corridor, linking Burkina Faso's industrial projects to railway systems stretching toward the Red Sea and Indian Ocean. Africa was finally connecting itself, not through colonial roots, but through cooperation. As the deal was signed, a Western journalist shouted a question at Traore during a press briefing. "President Traore, aren't you afraid of isolating Burkina Faso from the international community?" He smiled, paused, and replied calmly, "We are not isolated. We are independent, and that's a difference they can't seem to understand." Those words echoed across the world. Within hours, they trended under the hashtag #AfricanDependent. Artists turned them into lyrics. Youths painted them on city walls. Even in Western cities, African diasporas marched in solidarity, carrying flags that read, "We are not poor, we were pillaged." The revolution had become cultural. Then, in one of the most powerful moves yet, Traore announced the launch of Burkina Tech City, an innovation hub built entirely with local and Chinese collaboration. Its purpose? to incubate African startups in energy, engineering, and AI, not to sell products, but to solve African problems. Within a year, Burkina Faso's GDP growth surpassed projections by 45%. Exports diversified beyond minerals, now including solar panels, agricultural machinery, and electronic components. For the first time in modern history, Burkina Faso was exporting finished goods instead of raw materials. The West was silent, but Africa was awake. In his annual national address, Traoré stood before a massive crowd of supporters, his military uniform glinting under the evening lights. Behind him, the new skyline of Ouagadougou shimmered like a promise kept. He raised the microphone and spoke. "Brothers and sisters of Africa, we have seen the face of dependency, and we have defeated it. Let the world know, Africa's wealth is no longer for sale. Our dignity is no longer negotiable. From this soil, a new era is rising, built not on charity but on courage." The crowd roared, chanting his name. The fireworks lit up the African night. And as the chants grew louder, Burkina Faso, once a nation forgotten by the world, has become the symbol of a continent reborn. The partnership with China was never just about industry or economics. It was about rewriting history, about proving that when Africa stands together, no empire can dictate its destiny. The cameras zoom out, capturing the skyline, the factories, the people, and the unstoppable momentum of a continent finally taking control of its own story. Africa is not waiting anymore. Africa is moving. Subscribe for more updates on Africa's unstoppable rise.